Morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you see us?
I can see you now. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. My name is Gerasimos Rosados. I am the acting director of the Oil Conservation Division. I'm also the acting chair for the Oil Conservation Commission. We are continuing our evidentiary hearing today, April the 23rd, 2025, for the consolidated cases by Goodnight Midstream and Empire, New Mexico. Again, as always, I start with the case numbers. The case numbers for this particular hearing are case number 24123, 23614 through 17, 23775, 24018 through 24020, and 24025. One thing I wanted to mention before we started with our actual evidentiary hearing, Commissioner Impoma has a scheduling conflict tomorrow with his classes that he is teaching. So we do need to start tomorrow at 10:30 to accommodate the commissioner's schedule. So please just arrange tomorrow, Thursday the 24th, that we start at 10:30. Other than that, Mr. Hearing Officer, I transfer this hearing back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume we're ready in the back, Ms. Apodaca?
Yes, we are ready.
And I see the windows of the court reporter's virtual office. Madam Court Reporter, are we on the record?
We're on the record.
All right, good morning, everybody. Before we start, are there any preliminary matters?
Not from Empire.
None from Goodnight this morning. Thank you.
Nothing from OCD, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Nothing from Rice. Thank you.
Nothing
And-
from Pilot.
Okay, great. If memory serves me correctly, it's redirect of Mr. Knights. Mr. Knights, I'll just remind you, you're under oath from yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Good morning, Commission Chair, Commissioners. Good morning, Mr. Knights. How are you this morning?
Tired.
It's good to be honest, especially when you're on the stand. Mr. Knights, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that were raised during your cross-examination yesterday. Do you recall yesterday during cross-examination by Mr. Waymire, Empire's counsel, where you were asked questions about your revisions to your direct testimony that was submitted with the commission?
Correct. Yes.
And you made two corrections to your original direct testimony, correct?
Correct.
And the first was to correct the oil in place calculation because, as I understand, you assumed it was calculated based on 1 foot increments when there were really half-foot intervals. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that resulted in you cutting the oil in place calculations in half, correct?
Correcting them to that value.
Okay. Based on those half-foot intervals, right?
Correct. Yes.
Now, you were deposed in December of 2024 before you identified that mistake, correct?
Correct.
And Empire's experts could have reviewed your written testimony, exhibits, interpreted logs, and your analysis in advance of your deposition, correct?
Correct.
And they could have pointed out that error that resulted in 100% overestimate of the oil in place, correct?
Correct.
But that didn't happen. That wasn't brought up during your deposition, correct?
No. Yes. Correct.
And so no one else had identified to you that you had made that 100% overestimation of the oil in place, correct?
Correct.
But you yourself identified that error after your deposition and made the correction yourself to your testimony after you brought that to my attention, correct?
Correct.
And you filed, then we filed your revised testimony in January 2025, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then you also made another change, changing the oil saturation cutoff in your interpretation or in your analysis from 30% to 20%, correct?
Correct.
And as I understand, you did so because it was easier, your rationale was it was easier to compare based on Empire's experts' own definition of what a commercial ROZ is, correct?
Correct.
And you're not the only one who used a 20% oil saturation cutoff in your oil in place analysis, correct?
That is correct.
In fact, Empire's witness experts, Ops Geologic, did the same, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, when they used a 20% oil saturation cutoff in their oil in place calculations, they effectively wiped off all the oil saturations that are below the 20% oil saturation in their oil in place calculations, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So they did the same thing that Mr. Waymire was accusing you of doing by wiping off 20% all oil saturations up to 20% from their oil in place calculations, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, You were also, oops.
Oh, that's not me.
I do it 50% of the time myself, so no worries. Mr. Knights, you were also questioned about Dr. Lindsay's fracture study yesterday by Mr. Waymeyer. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And in fact, you did review Dr. Lindsay's fracture study, which was presented as part of his evidence and testimony on the EMSU 679 core, correct?
Correct.
We have an objection. Every single question has been leading, and I've let 30 of them go, but at some point we need to hear from the witness. Objection leading.
All right. Well, it's a fine line. I tend to allow it if it will move things along, but it's bear it in mind, Mr. Rankin.
I'll adjust. Mr. Knights, did you review Dr. Lindsay's fracture study on the EMSU 679?
Yes, I do.
What did you conclude about the fractures that he identified in that oriented core fracture study?
That they were basically the same conclusions he had, as they were 1 to 2 to 3 inches, and a few of them up to a foot or two. And that I disagree with his interpretation that somehow that indicated that there were fractures and faults that go all the way down to the St. Andreas 300 feet below it, especially since those fractures in the cores seem to be restricted to individual stratigraphic units.
Now, you just used the word St. Andreas, and I know, and having worked with you for as long as I have now, that you're almost allergic to formation tops. So let's talk about it in a different way. So when you mentioned the word St. Andreas, how do you relate that to Goodnight's permeability barrier?
Well, as people discuss the St. Andreas, I look at there's 3 different intervals in the St. Andreas. There's an upper St. Andreas of permeability barrier and a lower St. Andreas. The Goodnight injection is in the lower St. Andreas that is separated from the upper St. Andreas and the Grayberg. And it is very confusing when somebody mentions St. Andreas of which 3 intervals are you talking about.
And so just to be clear, those fractures in Dr. Lindsay's analysis of 1 to 3 inches, just explain whether it's your opinion that those fractures could extend down to the depths where Goodnight's disposal is occurring.
Yeah, I didn't see any indications that they would be extensive and go more than the couple of feet that he actually identified in the wells.
Okay. Now, kind of continuing down this path on fractures and communication, yesterday, Mr. Waymar and Dr. Mpoma both asked you questions about what evidence of the permeability barriers you testified exists from approximately -500 sub-C to about -700 sub-C. Do you recall those
Yes.
lines of questions? Okay. And had you, in preparation for your written testimony, did you actually review the core report for the EMSU 679 as part of your overall analysis?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Mr. Knights, is this a document that you prepared that identifies excerpts from the core report that was provided to Goodnight by Empire?
Yes, this is Lindsay's fracture study data.
And it's approximately 6 pages, and you've excerpted portions from that fracture study. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And if you would just review what this core report and information from Dr. Lindsay's fracture study shows with respect to your opinions about permeability barriers that you were asked about yesterday.
So most of the permeability that's in the testimony so far has been horizontal permeability. This core report actually has vertical permeability. And so what I've highlighted in blue is those permeabilities that are less than 1 millidarcy in blue. So each one of those blue boxes that are varying variations in feet, I would consider a perm barrier. And as you go through, I've also put on the measured depth. and the TBD sub C. And so as we go through these pages, you can see that there are multiple perm barriers as we go through the 175 feet. I think there'll be 29 sections of individual perm barriers that individually could be perm barriers, but in aggregate are significant perm barriers to vertical flow. The other, I think you'll see some other things I can describe.
Yeah,
going forward.
before we move on, I was going to ask you just to kind of sort of oriented and for the purposes of the record. So this is a table of the core information, and I'm going from left to right here. The columns got column headings. And I think it's the 1, 2, 3, fourth column heading has the vertical permeability. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And just so the record is clear, you were talking about these blue boxes. The number to the immediate right of that blue box is the vertical permeability that was measured in the core that you're referring to, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So and then on the left-hand side, you've got the measured depth, which is from the core report itself, correct?
Correct.
And then you've corrected that to a subsea depth based off the KB number for the well, right?
Correct.
Okay. Then so let's start with the blue boxes. I'll scroll through. If you just point out any points that you want to make as I scroll.
Yeah, we can start at the very first one just to get oriented. So the first level at 4170, these are 1 foot increments. The permeability is 13 millidarcies. The next foot down is 0.52 millidarcies, so significantly lower perm. And even if they're not mathematically, the ratio of those is actually a perm barrier to fluid. So when you have distinct, drastic changes in permeability, that's a restriction to vertical flow. And then as you go down, there's a 1 millidarcy, and then you get back into 2 feet that are below a millidarcy. And so I went through that entire core, and this is basically from 590, so down closer to the interval that I think is the main perm barrier across the field.
Now, in addition, on the far right, there's a description that whoever was analyzing the core, is that who? Explain to me what this shows on the far right in that column that says description.
Yeah, that is a lithology description that a geologist that was interpreting the cores did. And so I've marked 2 things on there. I've marked anhydrite, where that is present in the core. And then I've also, in a few places, marked SHR, the solid hydrocarbon residue, as just important features that I thought were important in the core.
Okay, so just so the record's clear, what is the significance of the presence of anhydrite here mean, and how does it relate to the testimony that Dr. Davidson gave?
Well, anhydrite's relatively difficult to identify, especially in these intervals. But when you do have anhydrite in the interval, it does indicate that there is anhydrite there. And I think Dr. Davidson, from his log analysis, identified areas that, from the log characteristic, could represent anhydrite.
Okay, so I'll scroll through the next page here, and just as I do, just mark, let us know what's significant on each of these pages.
Again, in this 25-foot interval, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 separate intervals that I would consider perm barriers. So I think those are individual layers, beds that, again, geology, it's deposited laterally and horizontally, so they could extend over significant areas.
Okay. Next page.
Next 25 feet, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 perm barriers. The other thing I'd like to present, these boxes in the red, those are extraordinarily high perm areas. And one of the things that does is it allows for, say, lost circulation. But those are also barriers to vertical perm. If you have fluid going up the system and you're going through very, very low perm and you hit a 4 Darcy perm interval, that fluid is not going to go up. It's going to go laterally. So it's like I don't know how bad analogy, but a reverse bucket with holes in it. If you're trying to get the water to go up and you hit this hole, the pressure's dropping, the water fluid's going laterally instead of vertically. So it's not just the low perm intervals that are barriers to vertical flow. It's also these high perm intervals. And so as you go through, we'll see a number of those. And the other thing on the right-hand side is you see an increasing number of indications of anhydrite.
And on that point that you just made about the vertical perm and the red boxes, it also appears to tend to explain if that correlates also with the horizontal perm in this case.
Correct. And sometimes you'll see a difference where the horizontal perm is much lower than the vertical perm, and that's an indication of fractures. But if you look at the perms here, those high perm streaks, and when you do have that fracture, it's very localized in 1 or 2 feet of the section and not completely in the entire interval.
And just to be clear, the column to the left of your vertical perm column is the horizontal perm measurements. Is that correct?
Yes, they have, when they do the cores, they measure a maximum perm direction and then 90 degrees to that to try to get a heterogeneity in the permeability, because there's some directional permeability.
And then you mentioned something when you were talking about this vertical perm value. You mentioned the term lost circulation. It was discussed yesterday. If you would just spend a moment and explain what that means and why you referred to that term here when you were talking about that value.
Yeah, as you're drilling a well and you have a fluid column and a pressure, if you hit a high permeability zone or a lower pressure zone, you start losing that fluid from the drilling mud and it goes out into the formation. And it's an indication of a significant change in pressure gradient or pressure. And that is basically, despite in some areas where the logs might say there's no porosity, but a lost circulation zone is a direct physical evidence of a change in pressure and permeability.
And in this particular instance, it's just a 1 foot increment, so you wouldn't expect to see significant results in your drilling, correct?
Yeah, depending on, but 1 foot you would definitely probably see something, but may not be significant.
Okay. Next page here, just touch on what we're seeing here and how it relates to your.
Okay, so we're down to 4250 on a measured depth and negative 665 TBD sub C. And we see now a little more concentrated permeability barriers. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 feet out of 13 feet that are, I would consider permeability barriers. And then as you can see in aggregate on this 25 foot, that those would be significant barriers. So again, I did mention yesterday about having a single perm barrier across the entire EMSU. It would be difficult to map, but in aggregate, these things are incredibly strong permeability barriers to vertical flow.
And you put on here, you indicated here at the top of San Andreas, and you put it in the parentheses GNM. What does that mean?
Well, that was my initials for Goodnight. Since most people are discussing San Andreas and Grayburg, again, I live in a TBD subsea world, so I don't have to deal with that. But some people need, so that is the Goodnight top, and it's right along some of this high permeability barriers.
And you didn't pick that depth, correct?
No, I did not. I took that from Preston McGuire, your Goodnight's geologist.
Okay, and you're not opining on that depth. You're just putting that there for reference, so we understand where Goodnight has picked its San Andreas top and permeability barrier, correct?
Correct. You can. There's an infinite way of picking a top, and I think if you were just presented this data, if you were thinking perm, you might go up to the top of that perm barrier and pick a top there, but the log data may pick it differently. It's just again, nomenclature is a quagmire.
Okay. And then the next page here, what does this show?
This shows 2 more perm barriers, or, it's probably about 90% of that interval is perm barrier to vertical flow. You can also see some anhydrite on the right side. Another thing that you see on the right side is SHR. That's the one below where if you're following his cursor, there it is. Bingo. So SHR is solid hydrocarbon residual. And as I mentioned before, that is a indication that you're below the ROZ or very close to the base of the ROZ.
And then I think this is your last page of this exhibit. What does this show here?
This shows more permeability barriers. Again, probably 90% of those are permeability barriers, but you're also seeing a little more of the high perm. So you have a couple of feet here, and maybe that 4 or 5 feet within that 10-foot zone, that would probably start losing mud weight and having a little more lost circulation.
And you've also indicated here some additional SHR notation.
Yes, some solid hydrocarbon residual. And so in aggregate, I know I mentioned yesterday that between 500 and 700 feet, I see in my interpretation a significant number of permeability barriers, but I really hadn't presented a map or a cross section or anything else. So I thought it would be important to, again, go back to the direct physical evidence, the actual core data, and kind of demonstrate what my interpretation is.
Now, on that point, you didn't yourself map anything, but you reviewed Mr. McGuire, some of Mr. McGuire's exhibits.
Correct.
Okay, this is Mr. McGuire's exhibit B9, which is a cross section that starts on the left from Empire, New Mexico's EMSU 460, and it includes Goodnight's disposal wells that are existing in the EMSU, and goes over to the EMSU 462, which is another water supply well. If you would, Mr. Knights, I'm going to direct your attention to the EMSU 460.
Yes.
And if you would just let us know what the approximate distance is of the EMSU 460 from the EMSU 679 well, which is the cord well that we were discussing.
Yeah, it's approximately 300 feet from the cord well. And so I think using the measured depth and the calculations from the core data and placing those on this cross section would be in that, was it 4,200 to 4,300?
Okay, I'm going to zoom into that depth so we can have a better look at it. And I'd like for you just to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing at that depth and how that relates to the core data that we just reviewed.
I guess could you go back so I get the depths right on the
Sure.
measured depth
To the
core?
the core.
What was it? Top and base. So the base was 43 and the top measured depth was 4175. So basically 42 to 4350. So if we look at 42 to 4350 on this interval, it'd be that interval there. So in that interval, I have a significant perm barrier within that interval, that 29 separate perm barriers and 175 feet of rock. And again, I didn't do any correlations or mapping across the field. But if I did, and let's just assume these are correct without my QC, but I would have extended that perm barrier across the stratigraphic interval across the EMSU and interpreted that as a perm barrier.
Just to be clear, what is the 460 well here? What is that well?
460 well is a water supply well. And so it was, you can see where the plug back and the perfs are. And so that was one of the wells. I'm not quite sure. Was it 65 million barrels of water were withdrawn from that interval.
And that was a well that previous EMSU operator Chevron drilled, correct?
Correct.
And you've reviewed the well file for that well?
Yes, I did.
And is that the top that Chevron picked, you know?
I believe that's the top that Chevron picked. It's my understanding that Goodnight started with the Chevron St. Andrews pick as this pick that goes across there, and I think they've adjusted it, but that was the starting point for.
Now, yesterday, Mr. Knights, you discussed generally as part of your in response to your cross-examination, your interpretation or understanding of what the influence or how the water supply wells and the volumes that were produced from the water supply wells and the volumes that were injected in the water injection wells that Goodnight operates that are depicted here influenced or underscored or informed your interpretation of the permeability barriers. If you would just explain, referencing this exhibit, how that is and how that supports your interpretation of these extensive permeability barriers across the MSU.
Okay. So I always like to start out with the hard physical evidence, which is core data. And looking at reviewing that, I think that's a strong firm barrier to vertical flow. And then the next data that I think is most important, again, is the material balance, both volumes and pressures. And this, the water supply wells making 69, so 130 million barrels out of this area, indicated a long, extensive reservoir. The 4 wells in the middle are the water injection wells, and those are injecting into, the simple answer is they're at the same depth as the water supply wells. I'd interpret that as an entire separate reservoir, a single reservoir across the entire EMSU. And because the flows and the pressures have very little indications from the withdrawal or the injection, very limited pressure changes in the interval, that is a tremendously large aquifer that has a huge capacity for both permeability and fluid volumes to be delivered in it. And it also indicates that it is pressure separated from the intervals above.
Okay. And I have an objection, would move to strike. This is not in any of the filed written testimony. Additionally, yesterday, I asked, what is the method for determining your barriers so that we can have an intelligent and sworn conversation about it? And it was 7% porosity was the answer. All of the work that he's done overnight with council has not been disclosed. As a matter of basic due process, this was due in writing months ago. And the explanation of I had overnight to come up with a new analysis is not sufficient. We object to move that it be stricken on the basis that it was not disclosed.
Mr. Hearing Officer, may I respond?
Sure.
Mr. Hearing Officer, actually, Mr. Knights did discuss this analysis yesterday, and he explained that his interpretation is that because of the volumes withdrawn and the volumes injected, and the fact that there is no response in the pressures, that informed his interpretation of the permeability barriers as being extensive and lateral in length. And I simply wanted to be able to clarify the basis for that because he was challenged on that point. And I wanted to be able to show to the commission what his basis for that testimony was.
May I reply briefly?
Well, my understanding is that he was going to defer pressure issues to somebody else.
That's true. And then this is not addressing the pressure. This is addressing his interpretation of the geology and how that informed his opinion.
May I reply briefly?
Okay.
Again, none of this was disclosed. In fact, the geologist said he didn't do any geology. And when I gave him all of the wells and said, where are the mud losses? No idea. How does this pressure play into anything? No idea. How do mud losses have to do with anything? Yeah, this is all, the explanation of I took overnight to work with the lawyer is not a sufficient deal. This is absolutely ambush. We've not had a due process opportunity to prepare or examine him on this. This was due months ago if he wanted to do the work. Additionally, with respect to the mapping, there's been no foundation for somebody put colored markers across a poster board and call it a perm barrier. This is not science.
Mr. Hearing Officer, What Mr. Waymire is saying is just not true. Mr. Knights, and I'm showing on my screen here, in his direct testimony, addressed mud losses in his direct testimony. Okay, he did address this issue, and it's important for him to be able to explain the basis for his opinion. He was challenged on it. Mr. Waymire was focusing on porosity and other items Mr. Knights did testify about. His interpretation of the importance of understanding the effect of the large volumes of water withdrawn and the large volumes of water injected as a basis for his understanding and interpretation that there are extensive permeability barriers. So, Mr. Waymire, it is not the case that this is ambush. He testified about it yesterday, and I'm simply trying to redirect to clarify the basis for his opinion. And that's exactly what he's given us today. I
It looks like your microphones are not working. Only mine is working. That's pretty insignificant. I can pass this around, I guess. All right, well,
I'll just.
you can come up here and speak into this microphone.
Can the court order this?
You guys hear me?
Is your green light on?
I turned it off and on, just to put. It wasn't working. Now, it's blue. Might be something coming from the mothership if all of them. So just.
Yeah, is there like, is there a muting function?
Well, at least for now, you could use this one so we can continue, so you can answer the question.
Mr. Hearing Officer, previously, Counsel for Empire argued strenuously that in their opinion, because of the obligations of the commission to confirm that there is no waste and to protect correlative rights, it's important for the commission to hear all relevant evidence. This is not an ambush. This is all evidence that was discussed in Mr. Knight's testimony. He stated that he relied on he reviewed the testimony of Mr. McGuire and relied on the exhibits by Mr. McGuire. He testified in his direct testimony that he was pointing out the lost circulation. And yesterday, during cross-examination, he testified that the extensive volumes, massive volumes of water that were withdrawn from the disposal zone and injected into the disposal zone informed his opinion about the lateral extent of these permeability barriers. I understand that Mr. Waymire doesn't want the commission to hear what Mr. Knights has to say, but I think it is absolutely within the scope of the cross and redirect. And I ask that the commission allow me to proceed.
Okay, I guess what I'm inclined to do is give Mr. Davidson like 15 minutes of recross limited to these exhibits. Okay, these two exhibits that we've seen so far, and if there are any other new ones, you'd be able to do that. I hate to open that door, and I don't mean that would be limited to Empire and not OCD, Rice, or Pilot. You'd have to carry the ball for everybody. That'd be satisfactory. With that said, I mean, there's only limited merit to your objection. I mean, I think we've heard a lot of this before, and I just would caution you, we don't need to hear this stuff again. I mean, I have in my notes from yesterday as well as just now, The lower San Andreas, I know that wasn't Mr. Knight's words, but that area, he said, is an entire separate EMSU-wide vast water reservoir. This is not the first time we've heard that. So go ahead, Mr. Rankin. Pardon? Oh. I guess so. Let's take a 10-minute break, I guess, and figure out what the technical issue is. Let's come back at 9:45.
Ah, there it goes.
Madam Court Reporter, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, so it looks like our technical issue is solved. Are we good in the back, Miss Apodaca?
Believe so.
Well,
Yes,
I can't hear that.
They still have an issue with the monitor, so there's still some things down.
All right, so, okay, we'll be back at 9:45.
testing. This work, testing.
Okay, so okay, let's see. Test.
Of course. Oh, yes. No. This was, yes, I meant to give some, that's okay. That's an official. Yes. Go on and tear it down. No. There's discharge. Well, yeah, it depends on what we want. We got it on. Hey. South Rebel. Oh. Oh. Charge me with waters of the city that. So it's a problem. Well, you're supposed to, like, supposed to talk with the rivers. You know. Like, no. I left there. Comment, and then.
Are we ready in the back there, Sheila?
Yes.
Madam Court Reporter, are you with us?
Yes, we're on the record.
Okay, great. And your mic is working, Mr. Rankin?
It is. Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Okay, it looks like we're down to
Yes.
one dysfunctional monitor. Everything else seems to be working. So while it is, let's proceed. And over the break, I did confer with commission members. So I'm inclined to sustain Mr. Waymeyer's objection. There is new material beyond my technical ability to understand, but not the commission. So to the extent that there's new material presented this morning, and that's not to disadvantage you, Mr. Rankin. If there's new material, I'm going to give Mr. Waymeyer an opportunity for recross on that new material. And the commission may have additional questions, okay? So to the extent that you open the door to this new stuff, and in fairness to you, some of the questions from the commission may have opened the door to some of this new stuff, but it's going to be fully explored, okay?
Mr. Green, I'm sorry, I have no objection to additional recross of Mr. Knight's.
All right,
Just to
I
be-
mean, it's already clear at this point that we're going to probably be going into May.
Yeah.
That's almost a foregone conclusion. So that being the case, time this week is not necessarily a finite constraint.
Mr. Hearing Officer, just so I'm clear on the ruling, your ruling is that you're sustaining Mr. Waymeyer's objections to this redirect testimony. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is there's merit to it, and we're going to solve it by not prohibiting you from continuing, but the stuff that you open the door to will be fodder for cross-examination and further examination by the commission,
And just for
as well as OCD pilot and Rice, although hopefully everybody else's cross and questions will cover your interests.
And just to be clear, you're not striking Mr. Knight's testimony.
No, not striking it. Your microphone is off again. Okay, it looks like everybody else's microphone except mine is also off again. There's nothing we can do about technical gremlins. Let's go off the record for 5 minutes and see what we can do. Madam Court Reporter?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready to go back on the record?
I'm ready.
It looks like our microphones are working again. I can't remember the name of the witness, Empire's witness that spoke so fast, but I'd encourage the rest of you to emulate him while the microphones are working. Go ahead, Mr. Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. I appreciate it. Before we move off this topic, I would like to move the admission of what I'll mark as Goodnight Exhibit E1, which is Mr. Is it? For sure. Okay, sorry, I apologize. I'm going to mark this as exhibit E2, which is, that would be attached to Mr. Knight's direct testimony. And based on his testimony in support of it, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Subject to my ruling empire, any objection?
Is what he's saying is E2, what is it, I guess, if I could inquire?
Sure. If I may respond, Mr. Hearing Officer, it would be this 6-page document that is excerpts from the Dr. Lindsay's core report. It's got base labels from discovery provided to us by Empire.
Is this what we're seeing on the screen, EMSU 679 vertical perm barriers?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Yes.
There's been no modifications to what was provided previously.
My understanding is the witness added the blue columns.
Was that last night?
I'm guessing it was.
It was
Then-
last night.
Then I absolutely have an objection. We do not have brand new, when this whole case about perm barriers, we don't have new perm barriers that come in at 11:30 at night working with council. This is
Okay.
brand new science work. We haven't had an opportunity to rebut it. We object strenuously.
I'm not going to admit it at this time. We'll see what happens after cross-examination. You can renew your request at that time.
Very well. Now, Mr. Knights, I'm going to move on to another demonstrative that was helpfully presented to the commission yesterday by Empire. I'm going to put it on my screen so you can see it, probably, hopefully better than you could see it yesterday on the chart that they put up by your seat. And you just tell me if you need me to zoom out or zoom in. But this is a demonstrative that was presented by Empire yesterday as part of your cross-examination. Do you recall?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Hold on a second, Mr. Rankin. Mr. Jurgensen, could you turn off your mic? I think we're getting feedback from that.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Apologies. You hadn't seen this demonstrative exhibit before yesterday, correct?
Correct.
And were you able to read it from where you were sitting yesterday?
No, I couldn't.
Could you identify what the wells were?
Not really, no.
Were you able to identify what the different lines were on the exhibit when you're being asked about them?
Well, they were described, but not labeled well enough that I felt confident about them.
And since yesterday, did you have a chance to review the exhibit that was provided or presented by Empire yesterday in your cross-examination?
Yes, I was.
But you didn't know at the time, you still don't know who created this, do you?
No,
Or exactly what data they used to create it?
no, I do not.
And you didn't have an opportunity at the time to determine whether it was accurate or not, correct?
Correct.
I'm just going to ask you what your understanding is, as you sit here today, of what these different lines are. So first of all, Mr. Knights, as you understand it, at the top here is a map. And what does that map show?
So it shows the cross-section that goes across the EMSU from the northwest to the east and southeast.
Okay. And then what's your understanding of what that cross-section map how does that relate to what's below on this exhibit?
I would say that's the cross-section line. So it shows that those wells are a cross-section going across the entire EMSU.
Okay. And it's hard to see them, but if you zoom in on this digital version, you can make out the well names and the API numbers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so a number of these are EMSU wells, and then some of them are SWD, saltwater disposal wells, correct?
Correct.
And many of these are actually Goodnight's wells as I go across the cross section, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you would, Mr. Knights, based on the cross-examination from Mr. Waymeyer, if you could just tell us what you understand this blue line to be that goes across the cross section here from left to right.
My understanding is that that's Goodnight's top of their San Andreas.
Okay. And since yesterday, you haven't gone through to confirm yourself whether those are accurate or not, correct?
No, I have not.
But your assumption is that those accurately reflect the pics that Goodnight has presented to Empire and in the course of discovery in this case, correct?
I would assume so.
Now, what's your understanding of what this, I'm going to call it fuchsia or purple line is that I'm indicating with my cursor here?
I believe that's the indicates the a lost circulation zone.
And what's your understanding of where the information may have come from that Empire or whoever created this chart used to indicate those depths?
I'm not sure the source, but when I reviewed it, I used the daily drilling reports.
And you had reviewed the daily drilling reports that were provided by Goodnight in Discovery. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you, how do you relate this cross-section that Empire, as I mentioned, I think helpfully created, showing a map across the entire EMSU, showing a lost circulation interval while operators drill down into the San Andreas that they encountered across the entire EMSU field. How do you relate that to the core data that we just reviewed?
Well, again, I think the core data shows that there's some very high permeability intervals that would be indicative of lost circulation. Some of those zones were very thin, so there might be minor losses of fluids. But if they were thicker, they could have significant loss of fluid.
Now, yesterday, I mean, just looking at this, I mean, one thing, I mean, what's your main takeaway just looking at this cross section? And I'm looking at each of these wells across the entire field. What's your main takeaway about the lost circulation that we're seeing here?
The main takeaway is that the lost circulation is below the Goodnight structure top, and I believe the red was that Empire's top of San Andreas?
Is that your understanding that the red is Empire's pick for the top of the San Andreas?
I think, but I really can't read it.
Okay, so now you have reviewed the drilling reports for many of these wells, correct?
Yes, well, all the Goodnight ones. There's some on there I haven't reviewed.
Okay, and yesterday during your testimony, you specifically called out the Andre Dawson that you had recollected the drilling report from the Andre Dawson. Do you recall that testimony?
Correct.
Okay, and you mentioned, now you said that you just stated that the lost circulation was below the pick for Goodnight's pick for the top of the San Andreas, right?
Could you repeat that question?
You had stated that the lost circulation identified on this cross section was below San Andreas's pick. Goodnight's pick for the top of the San Andreas, correct?
In most of the wells, but not in the Dawson.
Okay.
On this.
Now, you mentioned that yesterday that you were familiar with the Dawson drilling report. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you stated, as I recall, and you can clarify, that there was some minor loss circulation high, and then deeper in the zone, there was more substantial or loss circulation deeper down. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And this particular top here, or not top, but this particular location where Empire, whoever created this, we don't know, puts a loss circulation at approximately what depth would you say that is? In the
about
Dawson?
40-15, maybe 40-10.
Okay. So now, Mr. McGuire did include in his testimony, it's Exhibit B20, the drilling report, or part of the drilling report for the Andre Dawson. Is this the Andre Dawson or part of the Andre Dawson drilling report that you reviewed previously?
Correct.
Okay, this is Exhibit B20, Goodnight's Exhibit B20. Now, if I look at the first page on this, if you would, exhibit, Mr. Knights, just explain to us what we're seeing, what we're seeing here as we go down. What is the drilling report saying, beginning with this portion here that I'm highlighting in yellow?
Yeah, that's a drilling report that says there's minor seepage noticed at 4,000, and they added magnifiber to control. So
if you would relate that statement on the drilling report to what you testified about when we were reviewing the core report.
Well, a minor seepage would maybe be one of those high perm streaks that's very thin, maybe 1 foot or so.
And that 4,000 feet, if I go back to the demonstrative from Empire, 4,000 feet is about at this, whoops, I can't highlight this, but about the depth that I'm highlighting, I'm marking here with my cursor, right?
Correct.
And that's well above what the lost circulation zone is indicated on this cross section, right?
Yes, significantly above it.
Okay, so now let's go back to the drilling report on B20, and if you would, apologize. What is the next entry here that addresses any lost circulation?
That is at 4295, and that is 22 barrels per hour. A decent law, or decent or bad loss, but not tremendously significant. I don't think that would impede drilling.
Okay, let me go back to the demonstrative here, and I'm going to look again at the Andre Dawson well. I'm going to go back down. Where would you place 4295 on this interval?
It would be right on top of the red and the blue. So I think that would be the Empire's top of the San Andreas and Goodnight's top of the San Andreas.
Do you see any indication, or have you identified any indication in the drilling reports of any lost circulation that would correspond to what's marked on Empire's demonstrative here?
No, I do not.
Okay. So, and just so I'm clear, and the commission is clear and not misled, is there anything that did you go back and look at the mud log to determine whether there's any lost circulation reflected in the mud log that corresponds with the depths identified by Empire on this cross?
Yes, I did, and I didn't see anything at that depth.
Okay. Now, you talked about the fact that there are additional zones where there are more substantial lost circulation yesterday in your testimony. If I go to the next page of this, what is it? How does that jive with what you testified yesterday, and how does it relate to your understanding of?
Well, this statement at 4562, they were drilling dry, so they lost total returns, and my interpretation of that is a large perm barrier or lost circulation zone with high permeability that's much thicker than those 1 or 2 foot zones. And that is, since it is relatively consistent deeper in this lower San Andreas, that I think that's another big data point for the potential of large karsting in the lower San Andreas.
Now, last page here of Mr. McGuire's Exhibit B20. Again, what do we see here, and how does that relate to your interpretation?
See, drilled 12.5. Vertical hole 740 to 5760, and weight on bit and drilling dry. So as they were drilling to 5760, they couldn't keep fluid in the hole. The entire mud column just went out into the reservoir.
Okay. And if I go back to, are there any other wells that you recall that also exhibited substantial lost circulations that you would like to comment on?
I guess back on the Dawson, could you put your cursor at that 445 where the first lost circulation is?
4295, is that right?
That was the first one, but the second one was, I believe, at 45. So you can probably go back in there, right about there.
Okay.
Because the other thing I noticed on the cross section is that most of these major lost circulation zones were similar depth below the perm barrier. And that's another indication that across the MSU, you have a similar reservoir quality at that below the top of Goodnight's San Andreas Pick. And I think the other well that I was familiar with was the Rhino.
Okay.
Since it had and I remembered that it had multiple lost circulation zones. The first one, I think, being approximately where they have it marked. And then I think at 4560, I believe, they lost total returns. And I think it's right about where their black line is, which I if I can believe correctly, that was the OPS's top of Lower San Andreas. But there were a number of multiple, again, identifying that kind of quality of reservoir below the Goodnight top, and actually OPS's top of the San Andreas as well. I think that's a unique situation where we have two people picking the same top for San Andreas.
Now, I want to come back to another concept that you were crossed on yesterday by Mr. Waymar. And if you recall in your cross-examination by Mr. Waymar, do you recall him asking you, or he referred to baffles and sometimes to barriers when he was examining you? Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
What's your understanding, according to Mr. Waymar's definitions, of the difference between those two terms?
Well, it's my understanding that Mr. Waymar defines baffles as limited aerial extent perm barriers. And my perm barriers are, I think, an aggregate of perm barriers or baffles. I would consider perm barriers to vertical flow. So any one of those little low permeability intervals on a core thing would be maybe considered a baffle or a perm barrier, depending on your definition. But in aggregate, I think those are a strong vertical permeability barrier, especially when you have an interval of 100 feet and 50% of the rock is low perm.
So if you would, Mr. Nice, just explain again, just for clarity for the record, is it still your opinion that they're effective barriers, laterally extensive barriers in the aggregate across the interval in the EMSU from -500 sub-C to -700 sub-C?
Yes, that's my testimony.
Okay, and now just relating back again to Empire's demonstrative exhibit, if you would just please explain how the lost circulation that is depicted here and on this demonstrative exhibit supports your conclusion.
Well, the lost circulation is, especially when you consider the multiple lost circulations and the full column lost circulations at approximately a similar depth below both the OPS San Andreas top and the Goodnight San Andreas top, would indicate that that is another indication of a somewhat uniform reservoir and continuity across the entire EMSU.
Now, I'm going to pull up your direct testimony. And is this exhibit, rather, it's figure 13 from your revised direct testimony? Does this exhibit here support, corroborate what we just reviewed as to the lost circulation and Empire's demonstrative exhibit?
The perm barrier there is approximately the same depth as the perm barriers that were in the chord interval, and if you extrapolate Preston's tops across the EMSU.
And you undertook some of this mapping previously in your direct testimony and represented in figure 14, correct?
Well, mapping, they're basically points on a map and a cross section. I didn't create contour maps, but depending on how you define a map.
Does this network of does this network of barriers that you're discussing also match up with the one moment. Looking at Dr. Davidson's slides from his summary testimony, slide number 17, titled Cross-Section Showing Interval Embedded Anhydrites. Does this network of barriers that we were just discussing also match up with the embedded anhydrites that Dr. Davidson identified in his log interpretation analysis in his slide 17 that go from the northwest to the southeast across the MSU?
Yes, those are approximately the same depth intervals across the MSU.
Mr. Hearing Officer, this time I would move the admission as Goodnight Exhibit E2, the slide 17 from Dr. Davidson's summary testimony.
That's not already, I thought all these slides were already in the record.
Well, they were demonstratives. We didn't move them into admission. And so just want to make sure that this slide in particular is moved into admission. I'm happy to have the whole thing moved into admission or have it be part of the record.
Any objection from Empire?
If this was not appended to the sworn testimony when we received the direct testimony with exhibits and evidence, absolutely I object. There's been no foundation laid for its accuracy. This witness didn't create it. We oppose admission.
Was it? Was it?
It was not part of Mr. Davidson's written testimony. It was presented as part of his summary testimony. Mr. Davidson did testify to it. He presented it as part of his summary testimony. And I would ask that the hearing officer accept it into the record. Mr. Davidson, Mr. Knights also testified about it and believe it should be part of the record.
All right. Well, it was a different witness that testified about this, at least until now. Why don't you start making a list of these additional exhibits that you'd like moved into evidence, and I'll reserve ruling until after there's been further cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Now, does this also match up? Does your testimony and your analysis, Mr. Knights, also match up with the testimony of Mr. Macbeth, where he identified in the lower portion of the Grayberg substantial vertical permeability barriers in the EMSU 211 RFT data set provided by Empire?
Yes, it does.
Can you explain how that is, how that's the case?
The variation in pressures that don't conform to a single pressure gradient indicate that these individual layers are isolated, pressure isolated, and some of these zones are only 10 feet apart. So that means a perm barrier that is going to support pressure can be relatively thin.
If you would, Mr. Knights, just explain how these pressure differentials in the lower Grayberg could help sustain some of these lost circulation events in the lower San Andreas.
I'm not sure. Could you?
Well, I mean, these are in the lower Grayberg, and if you just put it into context, how is it that these substantial pressure differentials in the lower Grayberg would help explain some of these lost circulation zone in the San Andreas?
I think the individual perm barriers in the Grayberg and the lower Grayberg, and then the significant ones in the core analysis in the 679 well, indicate that even in between there's significant other perm barriers or baffles that are throughout the entire section that would inhibit vertical flow.
Okay.
I think the other thing that would relate is that these high perm streaks where you lose circulation could have dramatically different pressure gradients from those above.
Now, I'm going to move off of these to a different topic. Mr. Knights, that you addressed on your cross-examination. Do you recall Mr. Waymar asking you, cross-examining you on this slide number 14 in your cross-examination?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall him asking you about whether the 1939 report that you relied on for your analysis had any reference to Edgewater encroaching from the east?
Yes, I do.
And do you recall what your testimony was at the time?
I believed at the time that those arrows, they were my interpretation from the map, which is accurate. But I think after reviewing, I also went back and looked at the paper, and I may have got that implication from the actual write-up.
So I'm presenting here what was previously marked as Goodnight Midstream Cross Exhibit number 18. Is this the report that we were discussing, the 1939 report?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And if I, let's see, I thought I could quickly get to it, but I think it's on page. And I think it's starting on page 12 of that report. Is that where the study addresses Edgewater encroachment?
It is.
And when I scroll through at the bottom of page 12, I'll go ahead and read this into the record. Water was produced first in the southwest part of the Eunice field, probably because that part was drilled first. Did I read that sentence correctly?
Correct.
And then it goes on to say, quote, water is encroaching on the, and then I'll need to scroll down a couple pages to get to the next part of that sentence. West, southwest, and southeast edges of the field, but the water drive appears to be most active on the southwest. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
So in that sense, it's talking about that sentence, it's addressing that there is Edgewater encroachment on the southeast, correct?
Correct.
Now, the next paragraph goes on to say, quote, it will be noted in figure 10 that water is being produced from a large part of the structurally low portion of zone A. Now, that doesn't address Edgewater coming in from the east, correct?
Correct.
But the next sentence goes on to say, water is encroaching from the southeast and only recently has made its appearance in the northeastern portion of the zone. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
So here now it's talking about water encroachment from the Edgewater on the northeast, correct?
Correct.
Now, the next paragraph goes on to say, on the west, water encroachment is active in zone B, but is irregular in zone C. Now, that obviously doesn't relate to encroachment on the east, correct?
Correct.
It goes on to say, and I'll skip over this middle sentence here, but on the last sentence of that paragraph, it says, quote, on the east side of the field, water has encroached irregularly in zones B and C. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
So if I go back to your demonstrative, which is not your demonstrative, your summary slide, which is from figure 6 in your rebuttal testimony, correct?
Correct.
Just explain again, if you would, how that report and the description of the Edgewater that was identified in 1939 explains, in your opinion, the water production that has been observed through the course of history in the EMSU in the Grayburg.
Yeah, so the Grayburg, again, this paper in 1939, these lines and Hatchard lines are actual encroachment that happened between 1934, 35, 36, and 37. And as you can see on the map, it encroaches from basically all sides. Some of them very close to that EMS 239 well that is the one well that had really high water after it was drilled into the St. Andrews and completed in 1973. So it could have, the high water could be number one from the Edgewater from the north, but also from the deepening into the St. Andrews. It actually penetrated through the negative 3050 producing oil water contact of the original oil water contact and into the top of the St. Andrews. So it seems to me the logical source of water in that well is number one, Edgewater would be my first geologic assumption. And then second would be the deepening of the well into the St. Andrews on the top of the structure in 1973. Prior to I think it was 1970, that well had made only 35,000 barrels of water. Once it was deepened between 73 and I believe it was 81 when the map was made, that is the where all the water was produced in that well. So it's, in my opinion, caused by the deepening of the well into the top of the St. Andrews that brought that high water volume into that well.
Now, Mr. Knights, again, you've been agnostic or not wanting to talk about tops, but you're referring here to the San Andreas. I'm just going to kind of scroll down to another one of your exhibits, and I want you to explain when you say San Andreas, what it is you're
Not
talking
my
about.
St. Andrews.
Okay, one second. Let me get to. Okay, so here is a good one, I think. So if you would just maybe referring to this exhibit, when you talk about the San Andreas here, whose San Andreas are you talking about?
Well, in this one, it's the New Tech top that has the top of the St. Andrews 1 foot below the producing oil water contact. So any well penetrating the producing oil water contact, at least in this area, would be penetrating into the St. Andrews aquifer.
And just for
And
purpose,
I would say the St. Andrews, this is upper St. Andrews. So I still believe there's 3 distinct units in the St. Andrews, the upper St. Andrews, the perm barrier, and then the lower St. Andrews.
and just for purpose of record clarification, this figure from your summary slide is figure 4 in your rebuttal testimony, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Do you recall your testimony, cross-examining yesterday, where Mr. Waymire asked you questions about Ops Geologic's determination that some of their highest oil saturations are in the lowest porosity rock?
Correct.
Do you recall him asking you how you would get the oil into that tight porosity if the St. Andrews were just migratory pathways?
Yes.
Mr. Knights, are you convinced that much of that oil in Ops Geologic's analysis is actually oil?
Not convinced. I think because the saturations were so high in the intervals where we had core data, that if they're overall optimistic on their oil saturations and where we have core data, in areas that don't have core data and they have high oil saturations, I could be skeptical.
Would you mind clarifying your position for the commission?
Well, the very low porosities, if you reduce the porosity by a small portion, you could eliminate the porosity. I mean, the oil saturation in that interval.
Okay. Do you recall yesterday, Mr. Knight's cross-examination for Mr. Waymire asking you about whether you relied on Dr. Davidson for picking any of your formation tops?
I did not pick any formation tops, and Mr. Davidson did not give me any formation tops.
Okay, so did you in fact rely on Dr. Davidson for any tops of any kind in your analysis?
No.
And to your understanding, did Dr. Davidson even use any tops in his petrophysical analysis at all?
No, I know he did not.
Okay, and now his interpreted logs did include an indication of where Goodnight's top of St. Andrews is located, correct?
Yes.
But just to be clear, it's your understanding he did not use or rely on those in his interpretation or analysis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about sensitivity analyses. Mr. Waymire, do you recall yesterday, Mr. Waymire cross-examining you extensively over what sensitivities NSAI undertook to evaluate, to test its analysis?
Yes.
You recall during your testimony that you did identify that Dr. Davidson's analysis included a distribution between plus or minus 10%. Do you recall that?
Yes.
In fact, that plus or minus 10% was based, did you tell me, what's your understanding about what that plus or minus 10% was based on from Dr. Davidson's testimony?
It was based on reasonable estimates of the pressure differentials that could be used in his BSABO.
So that related to his core corrections, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so if the commission were looking for a high estimate of NSAI's petrophysical analysis, they would add 10% to Dr. Davidson's analysis, correct?
Objection. One, this is not his analysis, so it's not relevant. Secondly, we visited extensively yesterday about any sensitivity analysis he could share with the commission. The fact that he's either slept and dreamt it overnight, which is one of his methods he's testified to, or Mr. Rankin supplied it to him,
No.
does not somehow does not allow him to come today with a new sensitivity analysis after I spent 30 minutes trying to get him to tell me about one if he'd done one. So this is absolutely new. He's not the witness to do it with. That's the objection.
Mr. Herringhoff, if I may respond.
Please.
Mr. Knights. Our unsensitivities. Mr. Knights testified that there were sensitivities included in NSAI's analysis from Dr. Davidson's plus or minus 10%, which relate. And I'm just clarifying what that's based on because the record wasn't clear during the cross-examination yesterday. I want to make sure it's clear for the record.
I'm sorry. I'll allow the question and you can make note of it, Mr. Waymire, and go there again if you elect to.
So Mr. Knight, so basically, as I was asking you, if the commission want to understand the high side of NSI's petrophysical analysis, they would add 10% to Dr. Davidson's petrophysical analysis, correct?
Correct.
And if they want to understand NSAI's low side, based on Dr. Davidson's analysis, they would subtract 10% from his analysis, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Davidson, yesterday, do you recall being asked by Mr. Waymire if you're aware of any other units that allow commercial SWDs or saltwater disposal wells to inject within the unitized interval?
I do.
Now, as part of your analysis, Mr. Knights, you studied the history of water production, injection, and oil production in and around the MSU as part of your analysis, correct?
Correct.
And you identified that there was, tell me, did you identify any commercial saltwater disposal wells that were disposing of produced water in the San Andres, in the acreage that would later become the EMSU as part of your analysis?
Prior to the formation of the unit, yes.
And Goodnight's Exhibit B47, I'm going to just pull that up. This is Mr. McGuire's exhibit. Is that the well that I've highlighted here where showing it commenced injection in 1966? Is that the one you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the EMSU, what year was the EMSU created? Do you recall?
1986,
86?
83, 86.
Okay. And the unitization of the EMSU included the San Andres interval, which would have included the zone in which this well had been injecting for nearly 20 years, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware of any statutory water flood unit or any unit that was formed around and included disposal operations from an existing commercial disposal well?
No, I don't.
Are you aware of anyone, why anyone would possibly do that?
Well, yes, I know why.
Well, what's your, I mean, why would a unit operator seek to include an existing commercial saltwater disposal well within their unitized interval?
Well, in the process of unitizing, companies try to include all the water source and water injection ability so they can have a complete economic system. So from a water disposal and water source, they would want to include that in their interval, but not as a producing interval.
Now, you heard testimony from Mr. West. You were present for the testimony from Empire's witnesses, correct?
Correct.
And did you hear testimony from Mr. West and Mr. Wheeler that there was no hydrocarbon production from the San Andres at the time the EMSU was created in 1986?
Yes.
Okay. And you're familiar with the unitization documents stating that the San Andres was being included as a source of water supply?
Yes.
Mr. Knight's Goodnight Exhibit B7, is this part of the unitization documents that you reviewed as part of your work on this case?
Correct.
And if I scroll down on that exhibit, is this what you're referring to as you understand the reason that the operator who sought to create the EMSU included the San Andres as part of the unit?
Objection, speculation.
I'm asking what his understanding is.
Speculation. This is a matter of public record in terms of what the commission acted on, why, on what basis is rank speculation from a witness with no knowledge, and this is certainly not expert.
Overruled.
Mr. Nice, if you would just read for me the sentence that I've highlighted here and explain to me how this informs your understanding of why the San Andreas was included in the unitization of the EMSU.
Well, it was included, basically as a water source and a water disposal interval to make it an economic unit, not necessarily for hydrocarbon production.
And what this sentence says, quote, the bottom of the interval must be the base of the San Andreas formations to include the area's most prolific water production zone. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. And that substantiates your understanding for why the San Andreas was included in the EMSU, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Hearing Officer, at this time, I have no further questions for the witness and make him Mr. Hearing Officer, I guess before I make Mr. Nice available for any recross, I guess just for the record, can we make sure we understand what the scope of recross will be?
May I respond?
Yes.
It's all been new. So I think pretty much everything you heard today, being all brand new is I'm probably going to have some questions about it.
I'm going to give Mr. Waymeyer a wide leeway on it.
Just appreciate that, Mr. Officer. No problem.
The goal yesterday was when we broke and decided that you would redirect this morning was hopefully to narrow the scope of redirect, and instead it was expanded. So in all fairness to everybody, including the commission, Mr. Waymeyer and other parties are going to have wide leeway.
Thank you. May I proceed, Mr. Hearing Officer? Thank you. I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit just to try to move through it and get it done. And I'm going to start in the reverse order that council went through. With respect to you remember I asked you, were you aware of prior to this EMSU, the commission approving a saltwater disposal well, commercial saltwater disposal well within the boundaries of an existing oil unit? You remember that question?
Yes.
And you said you had no such knowledge. Is that right?
Correct.
And even after the evening with Mr. Rankin, you still have no such knowledge, do you?
Correct.
With respect to the 1939 paper, have you heard any other witnesses in this case talk about water coming in from the northeast?
No, I have not.
So you would be the first witness that would be offering an opinion about Edgewater encroaching into the Grayburg from the northeast.
Yes, I would.
That would also be inconsistent with Dr. Lindsay's testimony and many other testimony and literature that we've seen about the Grayburg pinching off to the east. And I'm going to misuse your term, trapping or at least pinching off to be a barrier.
Correct.
Now, did the paper say the water was encroaching from the northeast or southeast?
I believe it said it was southeast and the east.
But all of your arrows are not from the southeast. The arrows you added are actually from the northeast. Why?
That was basically the major water production.
What type of logs did they have in the year 1939?
Some very rudimentary logging tools.
Spontaneous potential log, would that be the only log that existed in 1939?
No, there were more logs than that.
Can we agree that over the last approximately 90 years, technology has improved drastically since your 1939 paper?
I would very much agree with that.
And you haven't been able to find anybody else that would have agreed that there was any water entering from the northeast or southeast, and your only basis for it is your 1939 paper?
Yes.
With respect to the cores, you wanted to talk today about core, and we covered yesterday that you didn't look at the core and you didn't describe the core, correct?
Correct.
Today, when you put up your slide with the blue highlighting on it against the core, did you see any descriptions where bedded anhydrite? Was bedded anhydrite discussed anywhere in the core descriptions?
No.
And in fact, where any identification of anhydrite happened, that actually doesn't line up at all with where you've placed your blue blocks, does it?
I don't specifically remember, but I don't think so.
In addition, just so we can put I thought today we talked a lot about pressures. I thought yesterday you didn't have any, hadn't done any pressures work. You didn't have any pressures testimony.
I think I mentioned pressures yesterday.
Okay, what was your methodology and work with respect to pressures as part of your engagement here?
I reviewed pressure data as it reflected on the geology. Again, the biggest indication is pressure and volume. So material balance is part of a geologic evaluation for myself. Since I've worked with an engineering firm for 32 years, I found that to be a critical component in geologic evaluations of reservoirs.
Okay, I'm gonna go in now and talk about the barriers. I thought we had visited about that at length yesterday, but apparently there's new testimony. First, before even getting into the barrier, have you performed any kind of geomechanical studies?
No.
Anywhere in the EMSU around it?
No,
Not work that you did?
No.
And you haven't seen any other work?
no,
And we talked about frac gradient analysis in terms of at what pressures as this builds will rock crack.
correct,
And a lot of this rock is dolomite. Yes,
correct.
that's a very easily cracked rock, isn't it?
Sometimes.
To the extent that Dr. Davidson wants to talk about anhydrite barriers, which doesn't line up with the core and is not reflected in the core. Can anhydrite be broken down by salt water?
Usually fresh water.
Okay, but water can break down anhydrites over time, can it?
Yes,
And you haven't done any studies in terms of if you wanted to write into the core description that there is anhydrite bedding and then move your blue blocks to put barriers at the anhydrite. We know we don't have frac gradient studies. We know we don't have geomechanical studies. We know water will break down anhydrites over time. You haven't done any kind of study in terms of the effect of this water injection, those pressures on anhydrite.
no, I have not.
Let's talk mapping. In terms of the map that I had, I'm going to try to publish this. If you could call this a map. All right. You put the brown permeability barrier. Are you calling this a map? What do you want to call this?
It's cross section. There's a map on one side that shows where the cross section goes. It's the two wells that have spectral gamma rays that are near the EMSU, but outside the boundary.
If we wanted to indulge this as mapping, did you do this kind of mapping anywhere else?
I have a number of cross sections and maps that show wells.
That show a perm barrier like this highlighted in brown?
No, I think the one in my summary testimony has them in black and gray and purple, I believe.
That was your work before today, right?
Before today. Yeah.
Before today and yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the perm barrier that Mr. Rankin chose to show the commission here, you can tell the commission that these wells are way off to the east in relation to our EMSU, aren't they?
Yes, they are 3 to 4 miles east.
3 to 4 miles east,
Yes.
right? And as we talk about the concept of mapping, I asked yesterday, I said, you're a geologist. Geologists love maps. You haven't created one single map here. With respect to the idea that there is an aerially consistent blanket of a barrier across all of the EMSU, you have never mapped that, have you?
Correct.
You've never tried to map that, have you?
Correct.
And in fact, you have seen from logs that there is a lot of heterogeneity in terms of carbonate systems such as we have here in the San Andres, isn't there?
Yes, very complex carbonate system.
In terms of being able to say that there is a blanket barrier that goes all the way across the EMSU, that would require extensive mapping in this heterogeneous environment, wouldn't it?
No.
Why did you not, if you want to testify today that there is, and again, I asked you yesterday, you remember yesterday I said, is it the testimony of Netherlands Sewell with you here in the seat that there is in fact a barrier that goes all the way across, and you said you couldn't testify to that one way or the other? Do you remember that?
Yes, a barrier.
Are you standing by that sworn testimony, or do you have new sworn testimony today?
And could you repeat that again?
Are you standing
What-
by are you standing by the sworn testimony yesterday, or do you want to have new sworn testimony and change it?
Tell you what, could you repeat what I actually said yesterday so I could understand?
That
It's
it was, that you were not standing here, sitting here testifying to the New Mexico Oil Conservation Commission,
I didn't,
that it was the determination of Netherlands Sewell that there is in fact an impermeable barrier that separates what you want to call the injection zone from the Grayberg.
Mr. Here, I also object, mischaracterization of Mr. Knight's testimony, I believe.
Hold on a second. I'm trying to find my notes. I think what the collective recollection here is that he said he would not commit to that 100%.
I guess I just want to make clear that Mr. Waymar is trying to get Mr. Knights to testify about a single barrier. And what Mr. Knights was testifying about is that there's multiple barriers in aggregate that substantiate his opinion. And that's my concern. Okay, for the record.
Mr. Waymire, having heard the objection, why don't you just see if you can rephrase the question?
We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about a barrier, and if there is one, where it is. If there's something that isolates the Grayberg from San Andreas, you remember all of that testimony.
I remember most of it.
And at the end of that, I asked you, are you sitting in that chair for Netherlands Sewell going to go on the record? You know, these transcripts are here. We're reading about 1984 proceedings, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Are you going on the record for Netherlands Sewell that there is an impermeable barrier that isolates all communication between the San Andreas and the Grayberg? Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no question. Is that non-responsive?
Yesterday you wanted to say it's gray. Is it gray?
Is there other color choices?
Like, there's been a lot of money and time spent at this thing, including written statements that we've had gone through rebuttal reports. You've even done a SIR rebuttal report, haven't you?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't think it's funny that we're here examining on brand new opinions while we haven't had access to experts to help guide the examination or to prepare written responses to it. And so my question is, at this foundational piece, number 2 of your very first charge here, do you remember we looked at your report yesterday?
Yes.
Number 2 in that of your charge was to confirm barriers from Goodnight. Do you remember that?
Yes.
At the end, did they tell you where the barriers were?
No.
Today, do you know where Goodnight's claimed barriers are?
Not necessarily. I know where my barriers would be.
Well, presumably they would have had some barrier. They're injecting into the San Andreas and they know there's Grayberg oil production immediately above it. Would you hope that they had barriers in their mind somewhere?
Yes.
But they didn't tell you where they are.
Not specifically, no.
And you have no clue with whether what you came up with in these 2 wells here aligns with what they had, do you?
I would assume that it would.
You don't know that. You're guessing.
Since I haven't seen they haven't provided me a perm barrier map or anything of the such, I guess I would not know what their perm barrier looks like.
And additionally, this perm barrier that you want to speak of today, it is not contiguous. You're saying there's different layers that if you put them all together, maybe they get there, right?
Yes.
And so the idea that somehow, as you talk about different layers of perm barriers alleged, that they could somehow align with what Goodnight would have come up with. You've certainly not done any of that comparison or work either, have you?
I'm very confident of the work that I've looked at, and all the data supports a perm barrier between the Goodnight injection zone and all the reservoirs above it.
But that's not true. And you know that's not true because I showed you the studies from the actual operators in this field, Chevron, in the technical committee report, Dr. Lindsay's PhD work, how can you say there is no evidence of communication after seeing the bubble maps, after seeing Dr. Buckwalter's material balance simulation? How can you honestly sit here and tell the commission that there is no evidence from some of this coming from the actual operator in field Chevron of communication?
I've seen some interpretations, but me looking at the data, I don't see any data that supports that. And I have a different expert opinion on whether there's a barrier or not.
Well, with respect to so you agree that's different than saying that there's no evidence, right? You would agree that there is certainly evidence that has been received by this commission that there is in fact communication.
No.
Now, as we come back to your work here, I think we talked about this yesterday. You viewed your work as just picking and critiquing what other people did. You did not perform a ground up analysis here, did you?
Well, all my analysis and due diligence is a ground up from the actual hard physical data and evidence. And I use that to do due diligence on any analysis that I've seen. And in that process, incorporating all that true physical data, I can come up with some conclusions that I feel are valid.
Had you ever, before today, had you ever mapped perm barriers within the 679 core?
No.
Okay, so if on my fuss that this is all brand new and we haven't had a chance to look at core is king. You were in here, Ryan Bailey was like, it's all about the core. Like we have to come back to the core. Dr. Lindsay starts this thing with geology from the very jump. You start with literature studies. You have to understand the geology. After you understand the geology, you want to look at the core and study the core and make sure everything correlates to the core. You've heard all that testimony, right?
Yes.
But you didn't do the geology work out here.
I'm a geologist, so I think all my work is geologic related and engineering.
In terms of stratigraphic analyses or lithological analyses, I'm probably mispronouncing it, lithology analysis, species analysis. You didn't do any of that, did you?
No.
Okay. And so coming back to core is king, before last night, you didn't even look in the core to try to see whether there were any barriers according to you.
No, that is wrong.
So why was it that last night you chose to put the blue blocks on there?
It was just a visualization of my analysis. I thought it would be representative and it would be important for the commission to see where those barriers are and how I came to my decision.
Dr. Davidson talked about barriers, and he used a different methodology than you, didn't he?
Yes.
And you have not done it because you didn't map across the unit. You couldn't say whether your alleged barrier matches up in all respects with Dr. Davidson's alleged barrier, can you?
They probably absolutely don't.
Okay.
Exactly.
So as we're looking for a barrier, you don't know what Goodnight would have interpreted as a barrier. You have what you want to offer the commission on as a barrier, and you've talked about dolomite and the way your barrier would work. It's not like we can just go out there and say at the bottom of the Grayburg, at the top of the San Andreas, here it is. We see it in core. This is the barrier. You can correlate it all the way across. That's not the kind of barrier you're talking about, right?
That may be present, but I haven't seen that.
You're talking about the stringer type system.
A plethora of baffles in a concentrated stratigraphic interval that creates a vertical perm barrier.
So as we talk about Dr. Davidson's methodology against yours, you would agree your perm barriers wouldn't align with what he came up with, would they?
Not exactly, no. Additionally,
Mr. Rankin showed you this cartoon. I'm going to try to get to it.
Mr. Hearing Officer, object to the characterization of the exhibit as a cartoon.
Is there a question pending?
I think Mr. Rankin just wanted to say this is not a cartoon. I don't think it was an objection in any serious sense, but maybe he wants to explain it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's overruled. We've used that term before.
All right. Who created the cartoon?
I believe it was Preston McGuire.
Preston McGuire. Okay. Now, Preston McGuire, do you know, other than like as an internship, has he ever worked at an oil company? Like someone that would produce and extract oil and gas out of the ground?
I don't know.
Okay. And as we talk about how one might create a cartoon, was this created before your work or after your work?
I actually don't know when it was created.
Okay. So you didn't provide input into the creation of the cartoon, did you?
No, I did not.
And again, Mr. Rankin showed it to you. Do you know, did Dr. Davidson provide input to Mr. McGuire for him to create the cartoon?
No.
Okay. And so I'm just trying to understand the thing because Mr. Rankin asked you questions over it. Can you see my cursor down here?
Yes.
If the shaded areas is a barrier, and water's being injected here, you see the little interval where they say there's injection?
Yes.
And the water would move over here in baffle fashion, move over here, move over here. Here, there's no connection. You could move through there. I mean, that is not an impermeable barrier, is it, with the way that they've created this?
I don't see how fluid would move as you have designated through there.
How not?
Vertical perm barriers.
Where are the vertical perm barriers shown on here?
Well, there's gray lines that Mr. McGuire has put on there.
You talking about the colored shaded in?
Yes.
What was his standard for deciding to shade something in?
I have no idea.
What is the aerial distance between these well logs?
Probably a mile, half a mile.
So you're talking about an entire mile in between this. And on what basis would you shade in between? Because you said you've never even tried to map, and in fact, you're confident you couldn't map barriers in between the various logs, could you?
I could. I didn't.
Okay. What would be the basis for example, like right here, when you're talking about a distance of a mile between logs, what would be the basis for putting a barrier indication right there in that triangle fashion?
Extrapolating data outside of a wellbore.
But he's got a log immediately to the left of it, and it shows no barrier at all there. How would that be extrapolating to a log?
I don't know how he created these gray lines, or if these are indications of perm barriers. Is there a legend on here?
I have no idea. You were asked questions about it and you testified off of this thing. So you're the guy I've got, since you're the one under oath and decided to have sworn testimony about this Exhibit B9 thing. I'm trying to figure out what is it and how on earth could this thing have been created?
Okay. Is that a question?
Is the answer you have no idea?
No.
You don't know? Or you do know?
Repeat your question.
As I ask, since he asked you questions about this thing, in terms of what this is.
Wait, to the first part. Say the first part again.
Mr. Rankin asked you questions about being the only reason I'm showing it.
No,
my next question is, how on earth was this created?
As a geologist, this is a common practice, and you try to interpolate between wells based on the log data. And it's both either stratigraphic, lithostratigraphic, chronostratigraphic, or a physical reservoir, or various techniques in extrapolating across these. It's a common mapping technique. I'm very used to seeing cross sections and evaluating them and looking at them. And right now, from as far as I see, this looks very reasonable. I'm not sure the specific interpretation. You'll have to talk to Mr. McGuire about exactly what he used to extrapolate in between the wells. But I'm looking at the core data in the 460 well that's right next to the 679 well, and I have 175 feet where predominant in that interval is low perm vertical barriers. And it seems like his correlation across there, much like on your map over here that has St. Andrews going across the EMSU and the lost drilling circulation at a similar depth across the EMSU, all indicate that these things are continuous across the EMSU.
Okay, here's my question. Before today, you have never been engaged here as an expert geologist to assess whatever these colored cartoons on and draw a scientific analysis on them, have you?
I don't think I was specifically asked to look at the color on this map.
I would hope that before you would just tell the commission this thing is accurate, you would do a whole lot of looking at logs. You would go back, look at core. You would go back and perform correlations. You wouldn't sit here and off the cuff, look at the cartoon who you don't know how it was created and say this thing is accurate. Do I have that right?
I wouldn't say it's inaccurate. I have looked at all the core data. I have looked at these logs. I have not correlated them. I've looked at the perforated intervals on the injection intervals. I've looked at the perforated intervals on the water supply wells, and all of that informed my opinions.
My question is on these cartoons. If I see these cartoons again, Netherlands Sewell has not performed an analysis on the accuracy of these cartoons, has it?
Correct.
And as far as you know, Dr. Davidson had no input on creating the cartoons. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in terms of the methodology that Goodnight would use for establishing a quote unquote perm barrier, you don't know that methodology, do you?
Not specifically, no.
With respect to the idea that it would be pressure based, based on lost circulation fluid, I want to ask about picking tops off of engineering data. Do you ever pick tops of formations? That's part of what you do, yes?
Yes.
Have you ever done it based off of engineering data and mud losses?
Mr. Hearing Officer, I understand wide scope, but I didn't redirect Mr. Knights at all on any of this.
I can respond briefly.
Sure.
Today, we now have tops. We know what tops are. Yesterday, we didn't know where the San Andreas was, where the Lovington Sand was, or where the Grayburg was. But today, we do have top information. So I'm exploring how he picks tops.
Okay, overruled.
Have you ever, as a geologist, given a client an analysis in which you picked tops of formations based on mud losses?
Tops of reservoirs, not necessarily formations. Top of reservoirs can cross formations.
So the idea that you would pick formation tops just using engineering data off of mud losses, that's not anything you've ever done. True?
Picking tops of formations, no.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's the way I phrased the question. Let me just ask it so we know what the no is. That's my fault. In the history of your career, you have never picked formation tops using engineering data and mud losses to define a top, have you?
To define a formation top, no.
Additionally, you have never mapped formations based on mud losses, have you?
Mapped formations, no.
Now, there was discussion about, do you remember Mr. Rankin's questions to you about Dr. Davidson's oils in place and the low case and the high case? And we visited about that earlier. You recall?
Yes.
And with respect to the 20%, you remember also visiting about the 20% oil saturation?
Yes.
You would agree that based on your testimony yesterday, that if a ROS, the feasibility of a ROS starts, if there's 20% oil saturation, you can start a ROS under the Meltzer and Dr. Trenum analysis?
Yeah, that's their definition of the minimum amount of oil you would need to
Start a project.
start a ROS.
And we've covered that Netherlands Sewell's analysis omits all oil, all the oil in place under 20% oil saturation is gone, right?
No, it's still there. It's just not in the oil in place calculation.
So you would agree here
Well-
that, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, if you have a net pay and you have 10 feet of 30% oil saturation, all that oil from 0 to 30 is counted in the oil in place. So your characterization of all the oil from less than 20% is excluded is inaccurate.
If it's below a 20% saturation over whatever interval, it's out, correct?
Well, if you have a oil saturation at 30%, all 30%, it's not that differential of 10%.
Right. But if it's anything under 20%, you've taken those volumes out, if that's the average saturation.
If that's the average saturation of the interval, then it is excluded as net pay, yes.
But the way that the CO2 injection would work, that CO2 is going to migrate upwards, reducing viscosity as it goes through all of the formation, isn't it?
Through all the formation is correct.
And so you would agree that that would make the oil in place numbers conservative, because within that 0 to 20%, some of that oil is going to be recovered through EOR, isn't it?
Yes, that would increase the oil in place and reduce the recovery factor.
And you speak in terms of conservative or not all the time, I imagine, as part of your work, yes?
Say that again.
Yeah, I imagine, speaking in terms of, is this analysis conservative as a sensitivity analysis? That's something that's part of your day-to-day work.
Yeah, adjectives are always used.
Yes. And so I'm just to put a point on it here, we know how EOR and CO2 works, that it's going to reduce that viscosity, that it's going to flood bottom to top, and that even if it's below that 20% threshold for an interval, CO2 will enter the interval and you will get some of that oil, right?
I would not say that that's a certainty.
Is it a likelihood?
Probably not.
But you would disagree that that would render the oil in place numbers conservative here, where we know that everything below 20% intervals is excluded from oil in place.
In my opinion, they're realistic, but some people call me short or tall. I'm 5'6".
This is the last I have, just because we've cracked open this deal on Dr. Davidson. I just want to be clear, and I think this will be helpful to Dr. Mpoma's questions yesterday, which we want to make sure gets answered. In terms of average oil saturations, based on core, did you go back last night and calculate average oil saturations at all?
No.
You know, that was something that Dr. Mpoma was asking about, would be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, let's just take it in pieces. Yesterday, we were talking about N values, and in fact, the N values that would come out of Dr. Davidson's work, he didn't exclude any of those oil saturations in the core, right? All of them were used.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I understand the Y leeway on recross, but I don't know how this relates to anything that I engaged with Mr. Knights on redirect.
He's brought back open the issue of volumes. This was a question Dr. Mpoma had yesterday. I think we can get it answered here. It's absolutely, if Mr. Rankin can bring in brand new testimony today, I think indulging 3 slides that will be less than 10 minutes would be incredibly helpful to the commission.
I'm trying to understand where I addressed the volumes. I may have misremembered. I don't know how I brought to the redirect.
All right, I'm going to give Mr. Waymeyer the leeway on this. Overruled.
Thank you.
Just starting to read that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get it where we can see it. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get this any larger. Can you at least read that there?
Yeah, the big words. Oh, that's better.
I think I got it. Okay. In terms of the spectrum of facies, we covered the spectrum of facies yesterday. And in that bottom left, this was actually Dr. Davidson. He was speaking about oil saturations from that UT BG paper. Was that on Seminole? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And
Yes.
what he was saying was in wax stone and mud dominated pack stone, based on the UTBG, you could, oil saturations that were reported there were up to 40%. And that was actually an average. The average oil saturation in the worst rock, wax stone and mud dominated pack stone, on average was 40% at Seminole. Do you remember seeing that and hearing him testify about it?
I don't remember exactly what that is. There was a residual oil or total oil.
That was oil saturate. What's the difference between residual oil versus total oil? Help me with that.
Well, a residual oil is basically a residual oil. You can have oil saturations that are significantly higher than that. So I don't know what the average.
Okay.
I just see residual oil saturations down here in the bottom.
Yeah. And again, it's his chart. That's my understanding is what this was. You don't know.
We can call Dr. Davidson back. But if you ask questions that I can answer, I know some of what he does.
Yeah. But we saw yesterday, like the magenta on the far right, if it's wax stone based on his model, it immediately puts 92% water saturation into it, doesn't it?
Mr. Hearing Officer, Dr. Davidson testified several times yesterday that they did not use wax stones in the model. If Mr. Waymar wanted to cross Dr. Davidson on this, he could have done so. He did. He crossed Mr. Nice extensively yesterday on Dr. Davidson. I don't see how this relates to my redirect or how it's appropriate to continue crossing Mr. Knights on something that is Dr. Davidson's work.
I'll allow it. It goes to weight, not admissibility.
Again, all of these volumes, every bit of testimony you have here in terms of volumes, it all comes from Dr. Davidson's work, right?
Correct.
And he used a facies model, and you're the geologist, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I would hope that you quality checked his data before you just plugged it in and offered sworn testimony, right?
I reviewed it.
Okay. So with respect to wax stone or worse rock, right? Wax stone or worse, it immediately starts with 92% water saturation, doesn't it?
Based on the core data, yes.
And we're going to talk about core data. But just based on these plots, does it appear that this would be consistent with Seminole in the BEG paper, where the worst rock facies has the highest oil saturations and the best rock facies has the worst oil saturations?
Could you repeat that question?
Yes. So what the BEG paper documented was that it was the worst rock that would have the highest oil saturations, right?
Okay. I think I saw that yesterday. Yes.
But in fact, the plots that Dr. Davidson uses would never allow the worst rock, that's wax stone or worse, to ever get higher than 92%, get lower than 92% water saturation. Fair?
Fair.
And the majority of his rock was wax stone or worse, right?
No, I don't believe wax stone was even in his model.
Even worse than, I don't know what to call it, worse than wax stone. How about that?
Nothing to the left on this chart was included in Dr. Davidson's.
It was all the stuff on the right.
Yes, wax stone
Or
was
worse.
not included.
Yeah. Now,
Hold on, Mr. Hearing Officer, I believe that's a mischaracterization of Dr. Davidson's testimony. We're getting down a path here where we're trying to retread Dr. Davidson's testimony with a witness who did not do the work. And so if he wants to ask him about how the rock relates to the core, that's fine, but we're totally getting off track here with Dr. Davidson's testimony.
Well, it's this witness's understanding of Dr. Davidson's testimony. This witness has already testified that his testimony relies upon and was based upon Dr. Davidson's testimony. And he's already answered the question, yes, overruled.
Thank you. So what we have here, again, just trying to get some of these questions, and I'm going to back out a little bit. What we have here is core data. It has been, just trying to get it to fit on one slide. There we go. Actual core data out of the 679. It's been sorted by rock type, so you can see the different core measurement points in different colors. Do you see that the x-axis is corrected core water saturation?
And how is that corrected?
This is off of the osteologic model where they've corrected oil in
Which one?
osteologic's chief case. I'm not sure. What do you mean? Which one?
There were two.
Okay. Off of the core?
Yes, both of their models had different adjustments to the core.
I'm going to get to the unadjusted next. Okay.
Okay, so this is the
adjusted.
the high side case.
The average, with them correcting, the average oil saturation was 23.94%. And the San Andreas was 21.44%. Do you see that?
Yes.
But with respect to the N values, you would agree if there's an N from the core, and as we bring this back to Lucia, if there's an N that goes over 10 or 11, that's highly suspicious, isn't it?
A lot of this stuff is math. And when you start dividing things, you can get some erroneous numbers, but the data behind it is really the problem. So yes, there can be some erroneous numbers in a calculation.
But I mean, again, just if you're seeing N values over 11, isn't that going to give you some concern that something is off in this data?
I would go back and look at the data.
Do you know that some of the core plots that Dr. Davidson used actually went over 100, went to 113? He left those data points in.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Using working off of an analysis in which the N value was over 100, it wouldn't surprise you that he would leave that in.
Yeah, when you look at petrophysical analysis, you have a lot of calculations, and these numbers can get out of whack. And I always go back and look at the actual data, and irrespective of whether the N vector was 200, I would relate that back to the actual core data and correlate it back and see what is validated to the core data. And then I would go and look at different fields, as Dr. Davidson did, and he did 5 independent studies of his model, and he accurately predicted the saturations that occurred in 5 different fields. So I think no matter how this person got to his number, I look at the end results and compare it and validate it to actual data, production data and other field data. And especially a blind test tells me a lot about the accuracy of the model. And if it had an N of 350, but it predicted all the actual data that I had, I would rely on that model.
So again, coming back, you're the geologist. I want to talk about, we know you didn't study the core, but with respect to the core here, we know that you cannot add oil to that core. Whatever you have measured in the core, it's at least that amount or something greater, right?
Correct.
And we know that it's going to be variable up and down the core as well, don't we?
The correction or the
variability of oil loss based on all sorts of different factors. It's not going to be uniformly lost from the top of the core to the bottom of the core. You're going to have different losses in different intervals of the core.
You could, does this analysis incorporate different BSOs at every foot?
My question is just as a matter of the physics, we know that as you move from top of core to bottom of the core, there's going to be different amounts of oil losses in different places, right?
Okay, yes.
And we also here don't know how the core was handled, do we?
I do not.
And so as we talk about unreasonable N values, would you agree that an N value over 11 is unreasonable?
No.
So an N value of 113, Dr. Davidson uses, it's not your testimony that that would be an unreasonable N value?
No, I would look at the results of the model and validate it.
And again, as we talk about how the core here was handled, you don't know how long the core laid around, which that can affect the oil measurements as well, can it?
Yes.
And so you would take issue with Scott Burkhead, and you issued a SIR rebuttal to Scott Burkhead, did you?
Yes.
Okay. So Scott Burkhead says these ends are unreasonable. If it's over 11, this is just crazy. I'm taking that out. This is suspect data. We can't draw conclusions from this data that is outside. You would disagree with that methodology?
So he is eliminating that core data from his data set.
If it's coming up with an N value over 11.
I think that's his interpretation, but I think that's a valid way, his methodology.
Okay. So Scott Burkhead's not crazy to eliminate what he's identified. If it's N over 11, this is suspect data. There's some problem here. This is not reasonable. I'm taking it out for purposes of my core analysis. You agree that's a valid methodology?
I think he used that as an interpretation.
Do you agree that's a valid methodology?
After reviewing and corroborating it with the actual well data and the areas that we do have production and core data, I think it didn't validate the analysis as much as Jim Davidson's did.
And do you agree that what Scott Burkhead used in excluding data that was over an 11N was a valid method? Yes or no?
I would say that is a reasonable petrophysical analysis.
Would you agree using N values of 113 would be an unreasonable petrophysical analysis?
No.
Now we have uncorrected averages in the Grayburg of 16.2% and 14.34% in the San Andreas. Do you see that?
No.
We just lost our monitors. Yeah, maybe they're back. And I have 2 minutes and I'm done here.
I guess it's 2 minutes too long.
If we put it to a vote, I'm probably way past the too long already. And I don't know, is it something I'm doing? Art, it's just art. Okay. Is,
Yeah.
may I inquire, is your monitor working? No? Okay. So the ones back here are working. It's the ones up there. The computers are working through the system.
I'm going to restart the system, and that's going to take us out of the Teams meeting for now, but I will rejoin once the system is restarted.
All right, let's come back at 11:30. We'll be off the record. Ms. Apodaca, I say this with fingers crossed. Are we good in the back?
I think so.
All right, for now.
For now, yes.
Madam Court Reporter, are you back with us?
Yes, sir.
Are we back on the record then, please?
We are on the record.
All right, thanks. Okay, so before you begin, and hopefully, I think you said 2 minutes, we'll try and hold you more or less to that. But before we go to that, Chairman Rosatos, you're not here in person, so you weren't privy to this discussion that we had. So you feel free to chime in at any point. We were talking about scheduling. I'm looking at Goodnight's witness list. We still have Nate Alleman, Preston McGuire, Dr. Larry Lake, Tom Thomas, Dick, and at least half of Mr. Macbeth or whatever's left of his testimony to get through for Goodnight. And we also have OCD with one, possibly two witnesses. So what we're thinking we should do is you all at some point off the record get together and figure out how you're going to allocate the remaining time available in this proceeding to get this thing done by, let me look at my calendar. We recommence May the 19th. We have that week set. So I'm suggesting that you all compute the time and witnesses between now and say May the 21st, which would be the Wednesday of that week, and allocate the time amongst yourselves so that we get this case done by, the goal will be by midweek, May the 21st. If you all would get together and see if you can do the math and maybe come back to us tomorrow and let us know if you've been able to reach any kind of agreement on that. All right. Mr. Waymeyer, go ahead with what remains of your cross-exam.
Thank you very much. And again, yesterday there was a question from Dr. Rampoma about looking just at core average oil saturations. And if those are average in the Grayburg before any correction whatsoever at 16.2%, does that align in general parameters with what you've just never calculated it?
No, I had an average of, I think it was 14.34 for all of it, didn't, or 3.7 on one of my exhibits that didn't distinguish between Grayburg and San Andreas.
Okay. And if OpsGeologic calculated the uncorrected oil saturation in the San Andreas as 14.34%, you would agree with that, disagree with that?
I would have to look, but it seems to me that that's high.
And then if we take out what Scott Burkhead identified as the suspicious saturations in the core, that is places that would have required an N over 11 or as high as 113 in Dr. Davidson's work, that would adjust to 17.2% uncorrected, but excluding the suspicious data in the Grayburg. Do you have any, just eyeballing it? Do you disagree with that?
The only thing it seems to be eliminating the very low saturations in the core.
The where the N value would go over 11 on a Lucia curve, right?
Yeah, so it's the low oil saturations in the core.
And then if uncorrected, if you take out those suspicious data points that would have N's over 11, would come to uncorrected oil saturation of 19.5 under Scott Burkhead's work. And I understand your caveat. You're saying I wouldn't take them out, but does that look rough order of magnitude like that would be accurate?
I do not know.
And then looking at the rock quality index, do you see as we talk about the different quality of rock that's color coded at the bottom against the plotted dots out of the core? Do you see that? At the very
I see
bottom.
the colors, and what are the
Yeah,
numbers?
Rock quality index in terms of just looking at the lower quality rock is going to be your blues and your teals. And the lower quality rock actually fits nicely with the UT Bureau of Economic Geology paper in terms of the expected 40-ish% saturations in the lower quality rock, and finding the lower saturations in the better quality of rock. Or have you not done an analysis like that here?
I'm just trying to understand the
Yeah.
plot. So the blue dots are poor quality rock,
Yes, that's lower on the rock quality index.
and the extremely suspicious saturations are all in the low quality rock.
Well, the blue flags show up that way. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
And those are the data that's excluded from the
Yes.
analysis.
yes, for the column on the right. But if you look to the left, you can see that lower quality rock. There's plenty of those data points that fit nicely into the curves, don't they?
I don't see that really.
Okay, I'm just indicating at these dark blue ones. Can you see them?
I see some blue ones over there. I see a lot more blue on the other side.
And again, you don't know how the core was handled. You do know that using those core data points would require extremely high N values, right?
Yes.
And we know that you can, based off of those core measurements, it could be significantly additional oil in there depending on how it was handled or expulsion, but it certainly can't be at least less, right?
Correct.
And then this is literally the last question. I just want to make sure the commissioners are clear. When you showed that the one we were looking at, where you said you had spectral gamma with the flag barrier on there, you with me on what we're talking about?
Yes.
Now that is significantly farther south and east from the EMSU, correct?
Yeah, it's I think 4 miles from the north end and 3 or 4 miles from the south end.
And you'd actually testified that, according to you, that was a completely different depositional environment down there, wasn't it?
I don't know. I don't remember testifying to that.
You've also talked about how nicely Dr. Davidson's model matches other EOR projects. Those are also, according to you, in different depositional environments, aren't they?
Yes.
So wouldn't that give you concern if he's matching those so closely, given that they're in a different depositional environment?
It seems like it would validate even more his model.
Pass the witness.
Does OCD have any questions?
No, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Rice?
I do have some questions. Mr. Knights, seemed like, again, today there was confusion about your position yesterday, which I thought we cleared up, about the barrier across the EMSU that prevents communication from the disposal zone above the disposal zone, right?
Correct.
And I thought yesterday you said that you can't say for certain that there is, quote, an impermissible barrier, right?
Correct.
And today, I think you said something that may have clarified that for me at least. And I just want to make sure that I'm clear on it, which is that you have found through the work that you've done that there's, today you use the phrase concentrated strata that prevent communication, right?
Correct.
What does that mean?
That means if you have a significant interval that a high percentage of your things are permeability barriers, that interval would be a significant perm barrier for fluid migration, vertical fluid migration. It would basically inhibit any fluid migration.
So you're saying that it's possible there isn't an impermissible that Mr. Waymeyer's talked to you about, but you just haven't confirmed that.
Correct.
But you have confirmed that there's concentrated strata that act in that strata to prevent communication from the injection zone up above it, right?
Correct.
Sure.
Now, when we look at this map, I think today you talked about wow, this is
Dawson.
really hard to read. Is this the Andre Dawson here?
Yes.
And this purple color, I think you said was the first area that there was a little loss of mud, right, from the drilling. And then if you look, the greater loss was at, I think, 4562. Is that right?
First one is right at the two top.
Mr. Hearing
Yeah,
Officer, I
yeah,
can't hear
yeah.
the witness.
Yeah, you'll have to, you guys will have to share that microphone.
Sure.
There were 3 lost circulation zones in the Dawson. And testing. Okay. There were 3 lost circulation zones in the Dawson, one significantly above at 4,000 feet where they don't have anything. There is not one at 4,000 or 4,315 where they had it. The first one that I saw was right at the tops, the St. Andrews tops by both Goodnight and Empire. And then below that, there was another total loss of circulation. I forget the exact depth, but it was somewhat approximately, the colors are different on here. So it was right about in this interval that it's just above the OPS lower St. Andrews pick.
So the third one where there was a total loss is just below that 4,500, maybe at the 4,550 line, somewhere in there.
Defer back to the mud log that we showed just a little earlier.
And then the second one we looked at was the Rhino SWD, is that right?
Correct.
And so that total loss, according to you, according to the records you reviewed, was about at 4,560, you said?
It was right about this, again, the lower St. Andrews pick by, I think it's OPS. So I think it was right in this interval right there.
So if we move that line down, then this purple line, I think it's fuchsia on the slide. If we move that down to the lower St. Andrews pick, it'd be right about there where my pin is.
Correct.
So that's continuing sort of the lateral or maybe a little bit lower line from those wells to the left. Agree?
Correct. And after reviewing the core data, what I see is that when you get close to that Goodnight's St. Andrews pick, there gets significantly more perm barriers, but there are also some of those high perm streaks that get progressively, it looks like, thicker as you get deeper. And although we don't have core data, if we did, I think these purple lines would match up with a significantly thick, high perm intervals that are best, basically, between 50 and 200, 300 feet below the top of the Goodnight St. Andrews structure.
And so what I'm suggesting here is that when we look at the significant loss, that purple line, if we use just the significant loss, would be basically lateral and maybe moving down a little bit as we go across this, as opposed to these big up jumps. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
And the strata, I think you said yesterday, was, I guess we called it the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, was about 200 feet. Was that right?
Correct.
And then if we look at the Goodnight picks and where that purple line would be, that's all right about 200 feet, right?
Yeah, it's about 200 feet from below that pick.
That's all I have, Mr. Hearing Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Pilot, any questions for Mr. Knights?
No questions, Mr. Hearing Officer.
All right, then back to Dr. Umpoma.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. So I do have a few questions. A lot of different, between yesterday, what we went through and then today. So I just want to clarify that. Can we have the core data that you showed with the blue boxes on for a moment? Okay. Yeah, I just want to take one of them. So, sir, I just want to clarify that. So you've highlighted the anhydrides. So just point out to the commission how the anhydride that we are seeing here supports your PEM barrier that you are using the permeability to establish.
Well, in using this core data, basically relied on the vertical perm and not a lithology.
Do you review Dr. Lindsay's testimony about how he described the anhydrides that were shown on the core?
I'm not sure which.
Okay. Do you know the type of anhydride that we have here?
I do not know.
Now, you are saying that these anhydrides, so you are collaborating Dr. Davidson's testimony that these anhydrides are all classified as barriers and all of that. I mean, you see anhydride just beneath your minus 600 TVDSS, just the one that is highlighted. And then you have VUX. You have a VUC there.
Yes.
So explain to the commission how anhydride, being there and then a VUC, becomes something that the commission should accept that is a barrier.
Well, I think in the core photo I showed before, you had dolomite and bugs filling with anhydrite. So I don't think it's in opposition to have anhydrite and a VUG and a low perm interval.
And you know that it's not all anhydrides that are classified as a PEM barrier.
Correct. I think one thing I'd like to state is that there's a number of ways you can calculate a perm barrier. We had Ops Geologic use a method. Dr. Davidson used a method using log analysis and determining what he called from high density anhydrite layers. He interpreted those as anhydrite layers. But again, I think I go back to the actual physical data of the actual core. And so this may not corroborate. And I think if I did another perm measurement using log data, I could come up with another interpretation of perm barriers. But in aggregate, when you have multiple different analysis techniques that come up with significant number of perm barriers over a small stratigraphic interval, that those are just demonstrative of a vertical perm barrier.
So, sir, with the blue boxes that you've picked, is it your testimony to the commission that these blue boxes, where you do have KV, let's say, under 1 millidarcy, it's truly a PEM barrier?
Yes, I believe so.
So would assuming, let's say, you are going to delineate your area for your project, would you use a PEM barrier of let's say 1 feet, 2 feet isolated to establish a PEM barrier?
Maybe not a single 1 foot interval, but a number of 1 foot intervals over a relatively thin stratigraphic interval, I would. And there are some places where very thin layers are incredibly strong perm barriers.
So, sir, you are using this to establish that there is a PEM barrier. Is this across the entire EMSU?
Using this data and the depth and the 460 log that is very close to this, and then after reviewing Preston McGuire's cross section, it does seem like there's a lateral continuity in that zone across the EMSU.
So if we dig deeper into Mr. Maguire's cartoon that was shown, I don't want to go much details with you on that, but
Yeah.
if we review that, do you believe that it will collaborate this?
I believe so. Yes.
So, sir, is it your testimony that in our industry, we use law circulation to identify barriers?
Yes.
Do we have reference?
Not that I know of, no.
So then how do you convince the commission without any well-established reference for us to more or less agree to that?
It's difficult for me to come up with a scenario where there's not a perm barrier because the physical processes are so dramatically different from the feet above it, and that it to me it's impractical not to think of those as perm barriers.
I don't want to go into the pressure discussion with you, but you brought it up again today. So you were able to use the pressure differences to more or less come up with different gradients within even the Greenberg. And then you're saying that this is attributed to potential PEM barriers.
Correct.
Did you research into that to collaborate that with the production history?
No. I use the difference in pressure gradient, assuming that the entire Grayberg was at some state in 1926 before any well was drilled, that it was in pressure communication and a constant. And so any differential in pressures would be obviously from the production that was done.
And then did you also analyze the water flood performance and attribute that to your assessment?
You repeat that one?
Did you also utilize the water flood performance period to support your claim within, let's say, these PEM barriers?
Yes. The water flood within the Grayberg showed very isolation and different depletion in multiple intervals, indicating that there were perm barriers even within the Grayberg, and then extending down in the core, seeing that it's in the Grayberg, and as you go towards the San Andreas, the top of the San Andreas, as Goodnight picked it, and as the Empire Group picked it on this cross section behind me, that as you approach that, these perm barriers become increasingly frequent, and I think is pretty much incredibly strong evidence that around the top of the San Andreas, that is a perm barrier in aggregate and in individual across the MSU.
So you talked about the unitization documentation, and I think I heard that you said the San Andreas, or you read that the San Andreas was included in the unit because of the water supply.
Correct.
I want to ask you, was it to the benefit of the unit holder or for everybody?
To include it as the operator of the unit would benefit if they had both the water supply, water disposal, and the oil and gas unit.
So it was specifically to the unit holder.
You're specifically to the unit holder.
Yeah, to the unit operator.
Yes.
Now, even if we are using that as a criteria, explain to the commission why the commission should allow external water with exceedingly high TDS comparable to even that salinity within that area. Would that not defeat the purpose of the in the long term, the water supply wells?
If there was a large continuing water flood, I would assume it would be. But I think there are probably other sources of water.
So compatibility will not be an issue here? Or shouldn't the commission even consider compatibility of the water that is coming in and the water that is there, that could be utilized as a water flood in the Greenback.
Yeah, I think the commission should consider the availability of water compatibility in the water flood and where that alternative water may come from.
So when Empire talks about there's a high possibility that there could be some high level of scales that even it's not easy to treat, should the commission not consider that?
I think the commission should consider everything possible.
My last question to you, when Mr. Beck talk about concentrated structure that represent the communication barrier, I mean, can you show the commission a cross section to really establish this?
Could you repeat that question again?
Yeah, so, he said, you testified that you support the assertion that there's a concentrated structure that represents the communication barrier. Did I read that correct?
Yes, correctly.
And I'm asking you, can you show a cross section, well-established cross section that is supported by a core, that is supported by madlocks, that is supported by logs to establish this statement?
Yes, and I think this 679 core establishes the vertical perm barriers towards the top of the St. Andrews and this well. I think the 300-foot well on the EMS 460 that's 300 feet away says this interval is correlatable. If I could corroborate Preston's cross section, or if you believe that cross section, that this interval that has established perm barriers from this core data is correlative across the EMSU. And I think the cross section provided by Empire here shows that all of the geologists in the previous that have picked the St. Andrews, I didn't, but that is kind of continuous across the EMSU.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ampoma. Mr. Lampkin, any additional questions for Mr. Knights?
I just have one question. With the heterogeneity of this interval that we've been discussing and the inconsistency of these low permeability zones affect formation parting pressure?
I would assume it would, but I do not know. That's not my expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rosatos, any questions for Mr. Knight?
I do not, but thank you, Mr. Knights, for your time. We appreciate it.
Mr. Chandler, don't want to leave you out. All right. May this witness be excused?
Yes, on behalf of Empire.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I'm sure Mr. Knight has far better things to do at this point in his life. So yes, I ask that he be excused.
Okay. All right. Well, before we break for lunch, can you tell us who your next witness will be?
In consultation with Empire Council, Mr. Hearing Officer, we're going to resume the cross of Mr. Macbeth. I'm going to make sure during the lunch break that he's available, and depending on how long that goes, then we would move into the direct testimony of Mr. Nate Allman. And then we were hoping to have Mr. Lake available if necessary this afternoon, because he's scheduled to fly in this afternoon and arrive in Santa Fe at 1:30. However, his flight had issues, so he had to take another route. And he's arriving in Albuquerque this evening at 8. So I guess if we happen to finish Mr. Allman early, I would ask that we be able to resume with Mr. Dr. Lake in the morning. I know that we can't start till 10:30, but that's my request of the commission.
Okay. All right. So after lunch, you'll be back up with Mr. Macbeth. All right, Mr. Webb.
And just to be clear, Mr. Hearing Officer and council understands this as well, that Mr. Macbeth will be testifying via the Teams platform.
Okay. Well, we hope he will, given this morning's technical difficulties. Mr. Chairman, what's your pleasure in terms of when we should be back here?
Let's come back at 1:15.
All right. And if you all have time or the opportunity to discuss scheduling of the remaining witnesses over lunch, that would be appreciated. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be adjourned till 1:15.